Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Diplomacy, it's what really separates the humans from lesser alien species and animals. The ability to settle dispute with words rather than bloodshed and turbolasers is what builds civilizations and alliances, progress and enlightenment. Because why fire blasters at your enemies when you can sell them blaster cartridges so they can shoot each other? A good diplomat can be the difference between a civilization ending war and a new economic and cultural partnership that leads to the formation of a 1,000-year republic. So, a good diplomat can be as powerful as 20 fleets of Star Destroyers. But a diplomat is just a single individual, and so it is up to the government, country, planet they are representing to give them all the tools necessary for their mission to be successful. And one of the most important tools they have at their disposal is transport. And so today we're going to take a look at what makes a really good diplomatic starship. First impressions are extremely important, especially when both parties do not know one another. That first meeting can open up plenty of doors, or it can close a lot of doors permanently and even lead to a first contact war.
Welcome to Earth.
If you have a military first dictatorship like the Empire, you'll have to balance how you present yourself to alien nations. In some cases, when dealing with more primitive and isolated species who could potentially make a good labor force or cannon fodder, using the threat of force or simply portraying the might of the Empire can easily turn things into your favor, or at least convince aliens that you're some kind of godlike empire with mystical powers. Especially if you're dealing with like a pre-space flight, pre-industrial species, you can really mess with them a lot, which is part of the fun. Just imagine hovering casually over their capital city with the Imperial-class Star Destroyer and launching turbo lasers into their village square. That's more than enough to frighten the entire planet into capitulation. The idea is to appear invulnerable and make resistance futile. But while that strategy might work on a more primitive world where you don't really have anything there that you want except for raw resources and manpower, this might not work as well on a more developed planet like Moncala. This world was filled with two extremely advanced species, and they would not take kindly if the Empire just started launching turbolaser bolts from orbit. A parade of Star Destroyers might be interpreted as a very thinly veiled threat. And the Empire, of course, does not want to destroy Moncala because it has a lot of shipyards around the planet. In this case, a small shuttle could be deployed from an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, which most importantly stays in orbit and does not enter the planet's atmosphere. This way the Empire is perceived to be respectful of Moncala's sovereignty. This is also why our president takes Air Force One when he visits other countries. This is an aircraft which looks and functions like any civilian airliner. It would send a completely different message if our diplomats, for instance, arrived at another country's shores in an aircraft carrier and then transitioned to a tank in order to discuss a new trade deal. Appearances isn't just about showing a military force or threats, it's also about showing other species what exactly your species stands for. The Old Republic, during the High Republic period, built the Starlight Beacon, a massive space station in the Outer Rim that was designed partly for an Outer Rim Republic Jedi quick reaction force and partly as a propaganda tool to unify the region. Inside the Starlight Beacon, you had all sorts of art and cultural exhibitions from all of the various species that made up the Republic. This is what the Republic wanted people to see because it represents their belief in diversity and unifying the galaxy. The Naboo were also very particular with how their diplomatic ships were designed. Almost all of them were created domestically by Theed Royal Palace Space Vessel Engineering Corps. These were all spectacular ships designed to be functional but also awe-inspiring with their beauty. For instance, the chromium plating on these ships made them look like liquid metal, but also served as a great shield against radiation and laser fire. The sleek and beautiful nature of these ships created a sense of mystery, class, and luxury around Naboo's delegation, wherever it arrived. Now, organizations like the Rebel Alliance and the Separatist Alliance were basically underdogs in civil wars. It was important for diplomats and representatives in these organizations to be treated seriously by their counterparts so that they could gather more resources and allies for their budding movements. The Trade Federation and Munilist banking clans, two of the main parties responsible for the separatist movement, fielded large mercantile fleets. Their diplomats were really just glorified trade representatives. On diplomatic missions, their envoys would usually bring examples of their riches in either credits or raw materials, maybe exotic animals, vehicles, and all sorts of other things. They also brought with them the threat of force by parking large fleets in orbit. Sure, the corporate trade representative might respect a planet's, atmospheric sovereignty and will take a shuttle of some kind down into the atmosphere, but the threat of an orbital blockade will always be visibly present as they try to strong-arm their way through some new trade deal. While not all diplomatic vessels were armed with offensive capabilities, most of them did have very robust defensive capabilities. Ultimately, the job of a diplomat can be very dangerous and full of unknowns. A diplomat's importance to the political process makes them very enticing targets for bandits and terrorists looking to collect on a big ransom. Usually the ships that diplomats travel in are quite upscale, and the possibility of maybe tribute being found on board made them potential targets for pirates as well. Ideally, you want such a large threat of force that when bandits recognize a diplomatic ship that belongs to your faction, they won't dare to touch it. But the galaxy is vast and dangerous, and deploying such assets without protection, even if you do have the threat of force behind it, is foolish. And so you'll want to have a ship that has a lot of speed. A Class 2.0 hyperdrive might be standard military issue for most ships of the line, but a Class 1.0 hyperdrive or lower will significantly cut down the amount of time you spend in hyperspace and allow your diplomats to actually be deployed on more missions. The Naboo, who were all the way in the mid-rim, understood the importance of fast hyperspace travel, and so most of their ships had, sub-Class 1 hyperdrives. But one cannot hide in hyperspace forever. You eventually will have to revert back to sublight speeds, or maybe someone will pull you out of hyperspace using an interdiction field. This is probably why the Alderaanians used the CR-90 Corvette, which was a blockade runner with a ridiculous amount of thrusters mounted onto its frame. Using speed to avoid fights is really in the Alderaanians' MO of non-aggression and de-escalation. Some factions like using shuttles to deploy their diplomats from larger capital ships, and so starfighters are used as escorts as well. The Empire used the standard ties in formation to make sure that their shuttles made it to their final destination, and the Separatists would use droid fighters. For the Rebel Alliance, however, they oftentimes just skip the shuttle thing completely. Individuals like Luke Skywalker would forge diplomatic ties using his X-Wing as his main transportation. The Republic, on the other hand, used the completely unarmed Conster-class cruiser. It did have very robust deflector shields and heavy armor plating. The Republic was so confident in its dominance of the galaxy that it didn't worry about their diplomatic ships being attacked in the first place. It knew it could create trade embargoes and other sanctions that could cripple entire worlds and factions. No matter what your strategy is, losing a diplomat because you haven't defended them properly is a huge political blow to your image amongst outsiders and potentially even amongst your own people. Whereas being too aggressive and maybe too well armed will make people more suspicious of you and lead to open warfare and conflict. The idea ultimately behind diplomacy is to strengthen an organization and create better relations in the interest of positive change. A good diplomatic ship is one that is extremely flexible and able to take on a bunch of different roles all at the same time. Now, ultimately, diplomats are going to have to carry out a lot of under-the-table meetings. This is usually called back-chilling, and it is here many times where the real political work is being done. During the Clone Wars, for instance, the news cycle was dominated by all of the fighting between the CIS and the Republic. But behind the scenes, you actually had moderates and peace-seeking senators on both sides of the war back-channeling with each other in the hopes that they can set the grounds for peace negotiations. Technically, this was an illegal and highly dangerous thing to do, especially when official channels for negotiations and diplomacy were cut off between these two factions. Attempts to seek peace with your enemy can easily be spun by the more hawkish members of your own government as treason or worse. When the senator from Naboo, Padme Amidala, attempts to meet her old friend Mina Bantari, a Separatist senator now, in person on the Separatist capital world of Raxus and Kundus, the only security she really takes with her on the mission is Ahsoka Tano. And instead of taking a Republic ship, they book passage as normal civilians on a standard passenger liner. Padme selected a passenger liner that flew Gazanti-class cruisers, and if you've seen our recent video about why the Gazanti-class cruiser is an extremely important vessel, you'll understand why this is a pretty safe and solid choice. Padme had to do this because if she had taken an official Republic ship or even a Naboo yacht, it most likely would have been recognized the moment it entered Roxas's orbit, and probably it would have been detained or maybe even destroyed. Also, using an official Republic vessel would require Padme's crew to file a flight plan, and a flight plan to the enemy's capital would raise alarms in the Republic, obviously. Remember, Padme is making these diplomatic overtures without any official authority from the Republic. She's here all on her own. She's only attempting to reconnect with the other side and gather information in the hope of finding some pro-peace separatists who she can work alongside. Using a fake identity and boarding public transportation is a great way to involve a lot less people in these clandestine operations. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you learned a little bit about creating the perfect diplomatic vessel. Let me know in the comment section below what your favorite diplomatic vessels are in all of Star Wars. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.